I am really honored and pleased to do the introduction today on a number of different levels. One is I took over environmental studies a little over a year ago, and one of the things that we wanted to sort of think about is how to create a program in communications, environmental communication. So I contacted Julie Dobrow from the Communications and Media Studies program, and we both got very excited about this idea. So this really, in some ways, represents our first sort of real collaborative effort around this theme, and we hope that there'll be many more like it as we think about how to communicate environmental issues to an often very skeptical public. So that's one reason. The other reason is that it's a full day's worth of events, and so this evening we also have a showing of a fierce green fire at 7 o'clock in Barnum. And a fierce green fire is sort of a history of environmental activism. I actually haven't seen it yet because it's so new. It just premiered at Sundance and got all sorts of awards. So we are actually showing it for one of the first times. And so thanks to, again, to Stephen and Lois, they were able to actually bring it here on DVD so we could watch it tonight. So I encourage you all to come to Barnum 008 tonight at 7 o'clock and listen to this document, to A Fierce Green Fire. And then I guess more grounded to the topic of today, Niagara Falls Love Canal was such a momentous time in the history of our country. It was building on the piggybacks of sort of an gradual increase in environmental awareness that came through with Rachel Carson. But the idea that companies could pollute and pollute and pollute and not be accountable, and that they would actually then think to build schools on top of waste dumps is just unfathomable. And it's really the efforts of Lois and Stephen fighting through incredible resistance to get a national awareness that this is not acceptable. We need to do something about it. And it's really a story of both sadness, because why should we have had to deal with this, but also hope that you can make a difference and you can really make change. The Love Canal actually led to legislation. One of those is the U.S. EPA's Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, which also later became known as the Superfund. And so we have lots of Superfund sites in Massachusetts. This is not unique to Niagara Falls in any way, shape, or form. And we have students who are interested in, we have a parking lot in Woburn, the transit thing that was built on the old Superfund site. So she founded the Citizens Clearinghouse for Hazardous Waste in the 1980s. That eventually morphed into the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice. And we have examples of some of their work here, but what's really most exciting, we have all their archival material now. They have donated all of their materials up to this point to Tufts University, and Ann Sauer is spearheading cataloging of this information. So this is a wonderful opportunity to think about how you might want to use these resources in your teaching, in your research, to think about what are some of the lessons learned about how to engage and keep people involved in something you really believe in. There's going to be a ribbon cutting this afternoon for this collection at 2:30. And is it going to be in the basement? I'm sorry for...
Yeah, so we have selections. We can't put the whole collection in the reading room because it's vastly large, but we do have materials from the collection available in the archives. They'll be available starting at 1:30, but we'll be coming down sort of to officially say it's open at 2:30, and you're welcome to come, stop by and take a look and see what we've got. So we'd love to have you come.
So 2:30 today, downstairs.
Yep, level G.
Level G. Okay, so Lois, who is sometimes referred to as the mother of the Superfund, says, do you like that?
I'm a mother of 4 children. The Superfund was not my idea.
She's a mother of 4 children, has been incredibly involved in cleaning up the toxic environment. She has received the Heinz Award in the Environment in 1999 and has received honorary degrees from Green Mountain College and Haverford College in the Philadelphia area. Stephen Lester currently serves as the Science Director of CHEJ and has served on many scientific advisory and peer review committees, including the Resource Council of the National Academy of Sciences, the National Institutes of Environment, Health Sciences, and the Congressional Office of Technology Assessment. And as a scientist myself, one of the things that I find so exciting about this, the work that they do together, is the way they think about getting the science and the policy and the activism and the social side merging, because I think that's really important moving forward to sort of understand what's the science behind the issues. He's a graduate from American University and has received master's degrees from both Harvard in toxicology and from New York University in environmental health. And so please join me in welcoming them to Tufts University, which we hope will be one day with us.
So thank you for inviting me, and I'm just so excited about the archives here. This is just like a totally fabulous place, and the archives are really from the beginning of CHEJ, which is in 1982. And so when the people, and the women should pay attention to this, when they write about the movement, whomever that is in the future, and they go to Anne and get the archives, they're actually going to write about the movement that was started and led primarily by women. It will not be about how the men did it, because they were involved, but they didn't do it. The women did it. All across the country, thousands and thousands of women who very much like myself, came out of this, home environment, taking care of children, taking to soccer practice, maybe working. All the women now work, unfortunately, today. And all of a sudden they grew as individuals, intellectually, matured, and they ran organizations where they would have never imagined, ever imagined, that they would be in that position. And so the archives do reflect that, and Stephen's going to talk about that, so I'm not going to steal all of his words. But the archives talk about how we did it, and it's just, you look at these newsletters and there's typos and there's bad English, and I used to write that bad English, and today I still write a little bit bad English, but I have staff now who clean it up and make me sound like really smart. So I want to talk a little bit about Love Canal, and in it I will talk about ways that we communicate with not only our local residents and families and friends, but also how we communicate it with the media. Because the fact of the matter is, if you look at the history of Love Canal and you were to look to see what happened there, and people were evacuated, but what was the reason people were evacuated? And the reason people were evacuated was because of close proximity to construction, the cleanup construction. The second time they were evacuated was because of mental anguish. And there's a reason, there's political reasons for this, and nobody ever wanted to admit that there was a causal relationship between the chemicals in the environment and the human health effects. And so our struggle, and the struggle of the Woburn people, actually Ann Anderson, we were just talking about Woburn last weekend at Northeastern with Jan Slickman, who did the lawsuit. But the Woburn moms, moms all across the country, their stories are very similar to mine. And today, all across the country, and you may have read about Leroy, New York, the stories are very much the same. In Leroy, New York, there is a cluster of young women, high school level, who have unexplained tics. And so I'm not a feminist, but I have to say this. So there's an old TCE, a solvent spill there, and there's a couple gas wells or vertical wells, but they use chemicals to make these wells. And they had these tics, and the families believed that the school population was at risk because of the spill and because of these gas wells around the school property. The neurologists all said it was psychosomatic, and that these women were having this problem psychosomatic. And then a young man developed a tic. And when the young man developed a tic, it suddenly might be environment. I mean, it's interesting how these things come out. Society over the last 30 plus years hasn't changed much. And it was just an example. It may in fact be psychosomatic. Nobody has done sufficient testing to determine one way or the other. but it was just interesting to me that the immediate response is, it's not the TCE spill, it's not stuff coming out of the well into the drinking water, into the air, it's psychosomatic. And it goes back to, we were moved because of psychological reasons. That's why President Carter moved us, because of psychological anguish. So 32 years later, we're hearing the same sort of thing. So I want to talk about a little bit about Love Canal and bring it to today's. And Mr. Lester, if you do this for me, I'll do this for you. If you could give me a 10-minute warning, and then I can be on time and leave time for you. So Love Canal was 1978, before many of you young people were even born. I was Irish Catholic, so I came from a family of 6 children. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad was a bricklayer. We were a union family. Daddy was big into the bricklaying union stuff. And back in 1978, my goal was to graduate high school and get married, buy a house, and have babies, because that's what the Irish Catholic did back in that day in my culture. And so I got married out of high school. I became pregnant. I had my first child. We bought our first home in the city of Niagara Falls called LaSalle. It wasn't called Love Canal. It was called the LaSalle area of the city of Niagara Falls. And we bought this house, and I was at 26 years old, had achieved the American dream by all standards. I had a house, we had a station wagon, we had a picket fence. My husband was gainfully employed. I had a healthy baby. We had HBO, the equivalent to internet today. And I just thought, this is just amazing. It's absolutely amazing at this young age that I could have all these things that my parents worked so much longer and harder to achieve. So after living there for a short period of time, my son Michael started getting sick. So first he developed asthma, then he developed epilepsy, where you have grand mal seizures. He then developed a liver problem and an immune system problem similar to what we see in HIV victims, except for his wasn't a virus. And it was one thing after the other, and I kept on saying, like, what's going on here? What is the problem? And my pediatrician, who I love to death, kept on saying, I don't know. You know, God gave you a sickly child because he knew you could handle it. It's like, yeah, no, God gave me a healthy baby. I don't know what's happened here. So after a while, I became pregnant. I still did not know about the dump. I became pregnant with my second child, Melissa. And Melissa, my pregnancy was fairly normal, but Melissa was born smaller than she should have been. And after a short period of time, a couple of years, Melissa too developed this rare blood disease. So on Friday, her body had little bruises on it. Saturday, they got larger. By Sunday, her entire body, and this is at the age of almost 3, her entire body was covered with bruises. And I called my pediatrician and said, there's something wrong with her, that I need to bring her in Monday morning because she has all these bruises and she doesn't have a fever, she's not sick to her tummy, she's not behaving any differently, she just looks awful. And so I took her to the doctor, and the doctor said, well, Mrs. Gibbs, what we can do is take a blood test and send you on back home, and then later this afternoon we'll get the results and I'll call you. And so they took Melissa's blood and they sent me home, and later that afternoon the doctor called and said, Mrs. Gibbs, I believe that your daughter has leukemia. And here's what we need for you to do. We need you to pick her up gently, put her in your car, do not put a seat harness on her, do not bump her, no pressure on her body because it could cause an internal hemorrhage, and take her to Buffalo Children's Hospital as quickly as possible. Now, my daughter is a toddler, right? And I'm going to put her in a car without a seat harness. So one of the communication skills I learned as a mother is that you give them a reward. So I told her if she sat perfectly still all the way there, she would get an ice cream cone. So she was invested in this. So she sat very nicely all the way there. And then when we got in there, they took her and put her into one of these sort of makeshift surgical little rooms, and said that in order to find out whether or not Melissa has leukemia, they have to insert a needle into her hip, withdraw some bone marrow, and look at it under a microscope. But because her blood count was so low, they did not want to do heavy anesthesiologist kind of stuff, pain medicine. So they asked me if I would go in and hold her down while they did this procedure. because they just wanted to give her a light sedation. And I walked into the room, and Melissa is screaming. She's a toddler. She doesn't understand. She's left alone with these strangers in this funny room, and crying. And as she's crying, her nose begins to hemorrhage, and her blood vessels in her face begin to burst. And I got very sick, and I walked out of the room and said, I can't do this. And while I'm standing outside the room, listening to my daughter, she's screaming on top of her lungs, Mommy, I promise I'll never be bad again. Please take me home, they're hurting me. I tell you this story not because my children suffered more than others. They didn't. My children survived. While this was happening to Melissa and Michael and my neighborhood children were getting sick, the city of Niagara Falls, the county of Niagara, the state of New York, and the Federal Environmental Protection Agency all knew it. They had done a report 2 years before my daughter got sick. They had done a report that said Love Canal posed an imminent health hazard. There were 20,000 tons of chemicals buried in the center of the community, according to the report. The chemicals had moved laterally through the soil into the basements of homes, and these chemicals were evaporating into the homes where men, women, and children lived 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Their report said that. And then they said there was an imminent health risk, and here's what we should do. And one of the suggestions they were offering was that they should put fans in the window to suck the air out of the basement into the outer doors. And anybody who pays a heating bill knows what that would cost us. And they had a number of other ideas as well, but the one idea that made the most sense was to put a trench around Love Canal, cover it with clay, and then have a pumping system in the center so that when the chemicals rose in the canal and began to move horizontally, they would be caught in this trench and then sucked up and treated on site. At the end of this report, it talked about cost-benefit analysis. And this is how they made the decision in 1976 to put the report in the file cabinet as opposed to act on the information they had. The cost-benefit analysis said that if we were to do this clay cap and trench, it would cost $20 million. And who's going to pay for it? So that was the cost. And then they looked at who would benefit. And this is how decisions are made today, every single day today, whether it's housing, whether it's healthcare, whether it's environment, decisions across the board, both corporate decisions and government decisions are made the same way. So they said, who would benefit? So they looked at the people in Love Canal. We were working class folk. And they looked at how much income there was per household. How many people are likely to die or be harmed, and how much income? And so if you took my household, for example, they looked at my husband. My husband made $10,000 a year. So he was worth $10,000 a year. I did not work outside my household, so I was worth nothing. Michael, my son, was likely to follow in his daddy's footsteps, so he was worth $10,000 a year plus an inflation factor. Melissa was likely to follow in her mother's footsteps, according to this mathematical model, and so she was worth nothing. So they assessed the average cost or average income in each house, and they made a decision. They made the decision that 900 families could be exposed to these chemicals defined by them as posing an imminent health risk because the costs of cleaning it up and protecting human life was too much. So I'm this housewife, right? And I'm reading this report. But because I'm also Irish, I have a temper. And nobody puts a price on the heads of my children or my husband. You know, he did Little League, he did Boy Scouts, he added to society. Well, he wasn't just worth that $10,000 that he made every day. In fact, that was tiny in comparison to what we did as a community. So I got mad, and I said, I'm going to do something about this. And one of the things that I learned very early on is that people do not understand the science, and people shy away from science, especially people who do not have a formal education beyond high school. So at first, what we decided was I went knocking on doors, we got people together to close the 99th Street School. And we were going to say that the 99th Street School is a problem because the school population playground is on top of the dump. The school board used to go out and put dirt over the chemicals as it would erupt to the surface. So scientifically, it makes absolutely no sense to do this. Well, Dr. Long, who was head of the school at the time, said that he was not about to close the school because of one irate, hysterical housewife and a sickly child. And so the answer was no. So we thought, well, all we need to do is prove more then. We need to prove more than the school. And so we went out and we collected health information in our community. And we found that 56% of the children born at Love Canal had birth defects. So 56% of our children had 3 ears, double rows of teeth, extra fingers, extra toes, or were mentally retarded. And in the same study period, we found there were 22 women who were pregnant at the time of the study, but only 4 normal babies came from that. The rest of the pregnancies ended in miscarriages, stillborn, or birth defected children. And so we put together this report with some doctors from Roswell, which is a cancer hospital, and from BU, Buffalo University of Buffalo, UB. And we presented this to the health department. And we presented it to our folks. Now, when we presented this to our folks and said, this is what's happening, everybody understood it because they knew their neighbors. They understood birth defects, they understood miscarriages, and there was a whole host of other diseases. So people were really upset. When we presented it to the state health department, the state health department said that it was useless housewife data collected by people who have a vested interest in the outcome. How come lay people who are struggling to fix a problem always have a vested interest, but government or corporations who have money at risk, big money at risk, never are accused of a vested interest? I always found that to be pretty remarkable. So we ended up taking this thing, because the state refused to look at our study, and we ended up doing something that was absolutely brilliant, and we did it by accident. None of us are trained, right? We have no clue what we're doing. But what we did is we took the study and we did things like a horror story of the week. So we found a family who was willing to talk to the media, and as a local person, you surely know this, you saw them all. And we would do human interest. The news media likes human interest stories. They'll do sort of the techie stories, but usually it's a talking head and nobody understands what's being said. Human interest, on the other hand, was a method that we used to communicate both to the politicians, to the general public, and to our own constituency in the community. So these human interest stories was, and we trained people that you had to say our opponent was Governor Hugh Carey at the time, because he was the only one who had the resources and the ability to fix the problem. The city of Niagara Falls could not do it, the county could not do it, it had to be the state. And we think Hooker and Occidental Petroleum was responsible, but we knew that that was a court fight that would go on for decades. So this is why we came up with the governor. So when we did the human interest story, everybody had to use the governor's name. It's not the Department of Environmental Conservation, it wasn't the Department of Health, it wasn't the Environmental Protection, it was Governor Hugh Carey. So when Barbara Quimby did her story in the newspaper, which is probably in the archives, but not the part that's visible today, because I think that we just sent. But it tells about how her child has these birth defects, a little swing set. She says, why does Governor Carey hate us? What did we ever do? We worked every day. I'm a church-going person, da-da-da. Governor Carey has to fix this problem. He says he cares about it. So that communication, that political communication, and that story, so people understand when they see a face, when they hear the story, when they see the child. And so as a result of that, Governor Hugh Carey directed the health department to do a health study, to prove us wrong, of course. That was his goal. And the health department did a health study, and then they came back and they said, they called me up at the homeowner's office. We had a little volunteer office. called me up to the home office and said, Lois, you're going to be so excited. We found the same results you did. It's like, yeah, really? Like, we didn't know what our neighbors were. I mean, like, we didn't lie to you. And he said, but we're going to announce it tonight. And I said, so what's the recommendation? Well, I can't tell you that. So they came to our local school, and they stood up on an elevated stage, and they talked about all of the methodology of their study and all this kind of stuff, which I totally did not understand. And then they were talking about the results, and we're all sitting there literally. You could hear a pin drop in this room of 600 people. And they began by saying that they found that 56% of the children in Love Canal were born with birth defects. And then they listed them that were identical to the ones we had listed. And we're waiting, right? And we're hoping they're going to say, and as a result, we're going to move women of childbearing age or move. They didn't say that. Instead, what they said was, we don't believe it's related to the 20,000 tons of chemicals in the center of the neighborhood. What we believe is happening is that there is a random clustering of genetically defective people in this community. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So you know, we're a little shocked by that. And then they talked about the miscarriages, and they confirmed there were 22 women who were pregnant. They confirmed that there were only 4 normal babies born. And then they said that but they didn't believe that those miscarriages were related to Love Canal either, that they believe the miscarriages were related to Lois Gibbs creating mass hysteria in the neighborhood and women going and having legalized abortions. Now these women lost their baby. I can't tell you how devastated they were to think that someone would think that they aborted their child as opposed to the loss of a child. So what we realized very early on at Love Canal is that science is really important. We need the science to document that we have a problem, to justify what we do. But science wasn't going to win the fight for us. And even today, if you look at climate change or you look at so many other issues, there's plenty of science, and what you end up with is the dueling experts, right, which nobody can follow. And it advances us as it relates to this justification to say we need to do something about climate change or we need to do something about Love Canal, but it doesn't engage people. And it doesn't change the minds of the politicians, because everything you find, all the scientists, the armies of scientists can find another reason for whatever is happening. So then we decided to go legal route. And a lot of people across the country, and you'll also see that in the archives, a lot of people across the country paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for lawyers to try and fight something that was happening to them. And so we went and sat down with our attorney, and our attorney said, well, before we talk about whether or not you have a legal case, let me sit you down and explain one thing to you. And it's like, okay. So we sat down, and he said, it's not illegal in America to poison people. You need to understand that. They give permits, they give licenses, they give discharge, permits for the air, for the water, for the soil. And each one of those licenses or permits allow a certain number of people to die. They do a risk assessment, they determine how many people are going to get cancer, how many people are going to get a disease, and essentially it says this many people could be sacrificed for this benefit to society, whatever that may be. And I'm like, really? Nobody in America knows that industries have licenses to kill. They think they have water discharge permits, which means that a little bit of dirty water is going in. Nobody understands in this country that we have allowed industries, good industries and bad industries, to poison people, and they've calculated. And the calculations are usually based on 1 in a million cancer risk, but the calculations are assuming that the industry will always run exactly perfect, right? It's also based on the science of today. Well, the science at Love Canal, or the science in Woburn, or the science in a million other communities across the country, yesterday is different than today. We would never, ever do what we did at Love Canal again today. We now understand that young children are exposed to indoor pollution, can have learning disabilities, can have all these problems. We didn't understand that in 1978. The only thing we had was workplace exposure. So to give somebody a license to poison based on today's science, which is all that we have, is crazy. It's just absolute craziness because we don't understand the science and it's evolving so quickly. You've heard about endocrine disruptors. We hear about all of these different chemicals that are in our products, in our air, in our food, in our environment. So we realize that if there's going to be change at Love Canal, and now at CHEJ we've worked with 11,000 groups nationwide, if we are going to help them win, not just their struggle, but the larger struggle, and engage in the larger struggle, that what we really need to do is fight politically. Fighting politically is a huge communications effort, I tell you. And what we did is we figured out who our target was, and what kind of communications and what do we need to do to move that target. And almost everything we've done then and now is really done through getting public support, larger public than the public we're dealing with. So at Love Canal, for example, we knew Governor Huckabee was running for re-election, and we knew we had an opportunity to affect his campaign. We were masters at getting media because we did human interest stories, because we didn't do dry stories. NIPERG, other groups came down and did reports on Love Canal, and they got a little bit of coverage, but nobody understood it. So human interest stories is what we used to talk about what we were doing, and we used Governor Huckabee's campaign. So for example, wherever he went across the state, we would call a friend, a relative, somebody, and ask them to carry a sign out front of his ribbon cutting event, whatever event he was having, his fundraiser, that said, "Carrie, are you going to allow the children at Love Canal to remain and die?" Period. That's all. And a flyer that they could hand out. Of course, we didn't have the internet back then, so that was really hard. We had to get that stuff to them. We also went to his $1,000 plate dinner and protested out front. So the $1,000 plate dinner, the thing that we had to understand is that the people who were going into the $1,000 plate dinner didn't really care whether we lived or died. What they cared about, I mean, some of them did, of course, but what they really cared about was getting their politician reelected. That was their goal. So on one side of our flyer, we wrote about the 56% birth defect rate. We wrote about all these other things. On the other side of the flyer, we talked about how we were going to hurt his campaign, how we were going to bring moms and babies to all his events, how we're going to talk about how he doesn't really care about the citizens of New York, because look what he's doing to the good families of Love Canal, hardworking, church-going people. And so we handed that out as people were going in, and the media just loved it. The media loved it because it was an opportunity to tell a story that was different than the governor, once again, with his rhetoric about what he's going to do for New York. And once inside, we had a spy inside. It was a $1,000 plate dinner, so we obviously couldn't go in and do it because we didn't have that kind of money. But we had a spy inside. And what they said inside was that the first thing the governor addressed from the podium was Love Canal. It wasn't highways, it wasn't jobs, it wasn't taxes, it wasn't your typical political talk. The first thing he talked about was, "I know you're all worried about those Love Canal people. I'm going to take care of them." And so it was a matter of really framing our issues to the audience that we were addressing, and moving that frame forward strategically to win on Love Canal. So all across the country, we're doing exactly the same thing. And we're doing it at all different levels. We're working in communities, spending time with them. I just spent a couple hours with some folks from North Carolina who are fighting something. How do you do this? How do you open it up? How do you make it a public conversation? If it's a public conversation, you're more likely to get traction than if it's just this little community over here that nobody has to engage in. We also do this with corporations. So an example of actually what young people have done that I think was very extraordinary is that we wanted to get PVC plastic, that's plastic with chlorine, so you also know it as vinyl. So we wanted to get PVC out of the marketplace. And so we went after Intimate Brand. Victoria's Secrets is one of their companies. So we went after Intimate Brand. We did this whole flyer about Victoria's Secrets, and all of their stuff and Bath and Body Works were in PVC containers. Everything, literally everything. And so we thought if we could move them, we could shift the market. And so we asked the students to get involved in this, And they loved it. They loved it because it was Victoria's dirty little secret. They didn't care so much about the campaign. They liked talking about Victoria's Secrets. The girls liked it, the guys liked it, everybody liked it. It was a buzz, right? And we asked them all to send an email to Intimate Brand about Victoria's dirty little secret. And if you do that, we're going to meet with corporations to see if we can move them. This is no joke. They got like 4,000 emails in less than 24 hours. They set up a meeting with us. In less than 30 days, they sat down with us in DC and said, we surrender. We're getting rid of all of the PVC bottles and Victoria's Secrets and Bath and Body Works and all of the other things we own, and you won. And we're sitting here like, we didn't know what else to say. Because like we had this whole pitch, about how dangerous it was, and we were going to convince them. And they just rolled right over it. And so I asked them, like, why did you do that? Why did you move so quickly on this? I'm just curious. And they said, because we got young people involved. People 21, between 17 and 25, so 21 sort of in the middle, they develop their market preferences in that age group, from 25 to 18. If they don't shop at Victoria's Secrets between 25 and 18 on a regular basis, they never will. If they don't, so the power of young people in corporate America is pretty remarkable, because all of their marketplace preferences of shampoo and body products and linens and whatever is developed between 18 and 25. They may stray and go somewhere else, this guy says, but they always come back. So we thought, oh, that's good. So we started all these market campaigns and has really shifted the market in a number of different places. But a lot of it was about how do we move young people, how do we move this corporation, really looking at our framing, looking at who we had to get involved, and how do we talk to them. And I think historically in the environmental movement in particular, one of the biggest obstacles that groups face is they don't know how to talk to people. And it's just really critical to be able to know your audience, frame the issue in a way they understand it, and then give them something to do. So in climate change, other than changing light bulbs, most people have no clue what to do. And that's because the climate change issue has been, and communications has been top down. It's not been bottom up, with the exception of 350.org and a couple groups like that. It's mostly all been top down. And so we lost the climate change bill in Congress because people couldn't figure out how to engage. All they heard was the climate scientists arguing with each other, either in the newspaper or on TV or something like that. So through the 30 years, communications is really important, and communications is really important. It needs to come from the bottom up. If you look at the civil rights, you look at all issues, women's issues, the peace movement, all of that is a bottom up, and that's how society changed, and really looking at how to talk to that audience and not just think that this is the best way to do it. So I'm going to stop there and let Stephen talk about his stuff. So thank you. And then we'll